Morning, everybody, and welcome to SalesTV again. It's great to be back on the only weekly LinkedIn Live about sales and sales issues. So today we're going to be talking about two things. We're going to be talking about education or training, or education and training. Are they the same thing? Are they different? And if they are, what are the differences? And we're also going to be talking about if you appear approachable, are people more likely to approach you? And is that a useful skill to have in sales in the modern world? I love the way that you're kind of looking as aggressive as possible there, Tim. I'm going to be unapproachable.
Oh, show you something.
Yeah. So before we go any further, let's all introduce ourselves, and hopefully Andy will be joining us shortly. So, Tim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. Also the author of 3 books. The latest one, Social Selling Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers, 2nd edition.
Marvelous. Alex.
Good morning, all. Alex Abbott, founder of Sapiro. 20 plus years in sales, B2B sales. Very much looking forward to the discussion today. Yeah, proud to be here. Week 2.
And I am Adam Gray. I'm Tim's business partner and co-founder of DLA Ignite. And yes, it's very exciting to be doing another LinkedIn weekly show, but focusing on sales and at the other end of the day, because we do one Friday afternoon and we're doing one first thing Tuesday morning. So let's kick off with that first question. Yeah. Well, actually, the second question: being approachable, is that going to help people approach you? Is there any point? Should you just have a footprint in the world that makes you look like you're good at your job at selling stuff?
Yeah.
Who's Andy?
Good morning.
Morning, Andy.
I'm having the morning from hell, so I do apologise for being so late, gentlemen.
That's no problem at all. You just here. We've just done introductions, so you're just here in time to introduce yourself.
Yeah, flustered guy called Andy who's found out his daughter's got a physics exam, took her to school because I thought she had my bank card, and she doesn't have my bank card. It's now lost somewhere in Highgate. So trying to figure out how to cancel card, keep daughter cool to do exam, lecturing at Cranfield, just off to Canada at 10 o'clock as soon as this course finished. So I set fire to my hair as well. Would that help?
Well, I mean, at least you're taking it nice and easy. That's the important thing. You know, you don't want to be cramming too much in if you can help it.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
So we just posed one of the questions for today: being approachable. Does that mean more people are going to approach you? Alex, you were about to answer that, weren't you?
Well, I don't know if I was going to answer it with a well thought through answer, but certainly when I think about the laws of attraction and how that can help salespeople, I feel like, just looking smart is no longer enough in sales. We really have to make an effort to look like an expert and earn that trusted advisor status. And, in a world where, we're all working more remotely, and perhaps not in front of our customers as much as we'd like to. How else do we do that but on social media?
Tim, thoughts?
I like Jackie's comment about good to see some smiley, approachable faces.
Yeah.
Yes.
Morning, Jackie.
A very good point.
Yeah, I think that there's a contract we have as salespeople to prospects that they expect us to do certain things, which is they expect us. Sorry, Andy, about this. Turn up on time. When we say we're going to get a proposal to you by Friday, that we get it to them by Friday and not Monday or whatever it is. And I think those things, in a way, those things are actually a given. But I think it's an interesting question because I think we quite often miss out on the fact that we tend to still, well, a lot of sales and marketing leaders still seem to think it's like 1980 and we can still sort of like mess about and do whatever we want and nobody will know. Whereas actually everything that we do is available for people to see, because people have moved to digital, and therefore there's an expectation that we, with 1 minute we're feeding the dog and next minute we reach for our phone and we're in LinkedIn or whatever, and we can look people up. And then we have the same contract as well, which is that we're going to be looked up by prospects and customers, and we need to be in a similar position. I'm not necessarily saying that we all need to wear a suit, because I've not worn a suit for years, but at least be respectable and be smart. And I would also add to this is the fact that research shows that the modern buyer is looking for an expert,
not a salesperson.
They're not looking for a salesperson. They're looking for an expert. They're looking for somebody that can help them. Now, I know that in sales we're salespeople, and I know that we're salespeople, and therefore I need to be a salesperson. But we also need to actually realize that the modern buyer is looking for an expert. And if we want to be successful, what we should be doing is aligning ourselves with what our customer and our buyer is thinking, rather than necessarily what we want or what we're thinking. And I think that's a difference, and something that people are still having to grapple with.
I would also add to that, Tim, that a buyer, when they don't have a need, isn't looking for an expert necessarily.
Yes. Yeah, and that's one of the things that, I've always worked in new business sales. So it's always been about, how do I build trust very quickly with people? But also what you're trying to do in new business is you're trying to get over the fact that you've got something and you want the other person to hear about it, and you want them to go, oh, wow, I need that. And building desire in an individual very, very fast is very, very difficult. Which means you need to be even more professional in the way that you work, because otherwise you just come across as there's a lot of people out there, because of social media, the barrier to entry for any expert is zero. And so you now also have to work harder to actually show, this is my expertise. This is what I stand for. And that's quite often very different from maybe what some people come online and their approach.
Andy, thoughts?
I think it's a kind of simple one and a complicated one at the same time, if that makes sense. I agree with everything that has been said around digital. I mean, we are absolutely visible now all the time. And I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but when I started in sales, there wasn't any digital at all. You got a phone, and I literally got a map of postcodes in South East Manchester out to Buxton and Cheshire, and away you went. And as a great guy I remember called Brent Derbyshire, who was the FD for Carpet, right? And to get to Brent, you kind of had to use some ingenuity. You had to get a public set of accounts. You had to understand if they use finance, etc., so forth. Then you had to get through using this thing called a telephone or a letter to him. Now today, I'll do it in a minute. I can instantly find out who the FD of Carpet Right is, and as you said, he can instantly find out who I am, and LinkedIn and social platforms tell him I'm there. So that's a very new world that salespeople find themselves in, and navigating that, I think, requires a huge amount of professionalism and a huge amount of resilience. It's a brutal place to be, and that you can put things out and not get any response, and therefore, as you try and do some of the right things, it can be hard. But then if I think about the things that haven't really changed, there is this thing, and somebody put it, I think it was either Martin, who talked about, solution selling. And Neil Rackham talks about, finding the underappreciated need. And a lot of the time, a lot of organizations don't understand either what the real problem is for them or the problem that they are approaching. And Neil Rackham talks about there's 19 salespeople that will sell you a ladder when you fall down a hole. What somebody wants is that one person who's going to say, there's a hole on the way, this is what you need to do to avoid it. but then, and I'll hand it back over, it's a trust issue. And I think someone's put down here in the chat, the reality comes down to people don't trust that person to say, hey, here's a problem coming down the road. You need to think about this, because we've lost the trust in sales to a great degree. So that bit that we need to bring back and embrace, where salespeople and who are experts in what they do can go in and say, this is what you need to be thinking about. That's what we need to recapture, and then tie that to the digital amplification. And I think we're starting to repair some of the stuff that's been coming for 3 decades.
Well, are we? So I think salespeople have a really difficult job when they're creating their persona. And I think it's a difficult job because if you are a tough closer, if that's your persona as a salesperson, if you get your claws into a prospect and you sink your teeth in and you don't let them get away, that makes you a very attractive proposition to the next person that's going to hire you, because we all want salespeople that are focused and aggressive and making their number. Unfortunately, though, when they dress themselves in that set of clothes, they make themselves progressively less attractive to the people that they're trying to sell to. And for most people in their roles, when they create that footprint and that persona and that set of clothes that they slip into, it appeals to both the customer and to the person that's hiring them. And with salespeople, it's almost like those two things are diametrically opposed. The less you appear like a salesperson, the more the customer wants to talk to you. The less you appear like a salesperson, the less likely you are to be hired. And I think that this makes it very difficult for them to position themselves out in an authentic way in the marketplace, doesn't it?
Depends what your end game is on LinkedIn, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's more than just LinkedIn, but yeah, ultimately everybody is in their job trying to make their number, but also they're looking for the next big opportunity, aren't they? Particularly salespeople that tend to be a gun for hire.
I don't think they are. I think that is rapidly changing, and that's, we may have talked, but Sean Aker from Harvard University is now talking about this, and he's in his book called The Happiness Advantage. He's actually saying that those concepts, particularly for sales, are dead and gone, or are fast approaching to be dead and gone. So happiness is not generated by you hitting your number. You hit your number because you are happy and you are balanced and you have well-being. And if you look at some of the research around knowledge in sales, let's just call it that, over the last 4 decades, things have moved on. So historically, when I started work, you needed to know about your product and your company. Then it went on to now looking at your competitors and your market and your customer. And as we came into this century, actually what we're saying is to be more performant, there is other things that you need. And there are things like, I'll give you an example, quiet ego, empathy, even things like religious orientation. All of those things actually make the difference. So I think the humanity is now coming out in the sales world, that the smart person is coming to say, as a leader, I need to bring out the actual authenticity of the individual, and people will connect to them. And that is changing rapidly, and explains a lot, Adam, to a point as to why so many people are leaving sales and so few people actually want to go into it right now. And
what was the figure that you gave last week, wasn't it, that there were
700,000.
unfilled sales roles?
Yeah, in the US, and it's about 91,000. It fluctuates in the UK between about 95 and 102,000. And it's fascinating. So obviously took my daughter to school today, trying to retrieve my bank card, and she said, "Oh, where are you going today?" I said, "Oh, I'm off to Canada. I'm off to Toronto." And she said, "Oh, why are you going there?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to the Global Sales Science Institute, or top academics from sales around the world. We're going to pitch up. We're going to talk about papers. We're going to talk about some real things like AI and sales, etc." And she turned around and she just went, "Sounds boring." I was like, "Oh, okay." And she just turned around and said, "Because that's why I want to go into the medical profession." And I went, "Brilliant." I said, "But you do realise that is the profession that looks at lots of studying, lots of papers, and all that stuff." And she said, "Yeah." She said, "It's not really the papers and academic bit I don't think is great." She said, "It's the sales bit." And I just turned to her and just went, "Yeah, but that's part of the problem, is that everybody calls sales something else." So I said, if you look at global trade is sales. That's exactly what it is. Import, export is selling to someone else or buying from somebody else. I said, we all talk about GDP. GDP is derived from sales. That's what it is. If you think about the lifeblood of revenue, it's sales. And she just went, "Oh, yeah." And then that's back to that authenticity, Adam, and trust, isn't it? We don't trust to call things sales, so we call it something else. And yet it's the absolute grassroots of everything. If we don't have GDP, we don't have revenue, we don't have an economy. And yet young people go, that's dirty.
A dagger straight to the heart of your own daughter. Yeah.
That was the second dagger. And the second dagger was when actually Andrew told me she'd lost my bank card. So that was a double whammy this morning before I.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's interesting because I think at many levels we know this. Salespeople know this, but rarely do we see it actually inform their behavior.
Well, you've got this, one of the problems I see, so Adam, you spoke about kind of, a salesperson kind of making sure they look like a salesperson when they're going for a job, but when they're looking to speak to a potential buyer, not looking like a salesperson. Sorry, Andy?
He's talking to the person behind him.
Yeah. Sorry, guys, carry
on. So, we as salespeople, when we're looking for that job, we want to be the best salesperson or portray ourselves as the best salesperson possible. And the expectation from the hiring manager, from the employer, is that you're going to deliver results. And so, sometimes you tell them what they need to hear because you want to meet their expectations. And I think that kind of is part of the problem. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, about that particular point where there's this kind of misalignment between the expectation of a business and the sales team, or the employer or the hiring manager and the salesperson, and the salesperson wanting to deliver, aspiring to deliver, but knowing full well it's going to take many months to build relationships and actually create a more kind of systematic approach to success.
I think that comes down to number of conversations and pipeline, doesn't it? I mean, I don't think many sales organizations have enough conversations going on and enough pipeline, and people don't manage their own business accordingly. So if you have more than enough conversations and business to meet your goal, you can afford to act in a certain way, which is this might not be for you, Mr. Hughes. I'm sorry. There's another product which I think is far better suited to you. I build credibility, I build trust, but actually no, my goal is such I don't have enough. So Tim, this is it. This is wonderful. You need to buy this now, otherwise the world will end. and then I go into aggressive close from Adam, and that's the issue, isn't it? We don't have enough conversations and pipeline as a set of salespeople, so therefore we force our will onto the buyer.
Yeah,
a really good point. It all stems from having the confidence and the flexibility to be able to do the right thing, doesn't it? When you're up against it, any sale will do, and when you've got that freedom, you have the opportunity to do the right thing. So this is an education issue, isn't it? Or is it a training issue? Our other conversation point for today, and this was really interesting when we discussed this yesterday, Andy, when you said the difference between training and education, and yeah, I mean these are interchangeable in most people's minds, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, probably incorrectly though. So training is about an intervention, whereas education is a lifelong journey, and we in sales don't tend to we don't enable that. So if we think about the issues in an organization, somebody, probably the FD or the board, will go, here's the issue, that our shareholders are not getting what they want. Henceforth, the answer will look a lot like this. Let us go out to RFPs, and then everybody comes in and delivers against that RFP, mostly inaccurately. I put a post out on LinkedIn. It didn't get a huge amount of responses, but it's actually, have we trained salespeople not to learn? It's probably the amalgamation of the issue, Adam, which is, salespeople are told what they need to know when. It doesn't happen in any other profession. It's called lifelong learning and continuous professional development, and that's an educational process based on trust, based on adult learning theory, and based on the cognitive journey of how people learn in different stages of their life. So, and somebody's put it in here, which is great, which is, it's about enabling. So, Ty Ricks is put in, it's about enabling people to be successful against their goals. And I've got to say, I really hate the word enable, because it's been robbed. It's completely been hijacked. So enablement is not a really slick software tool that allows you to understand what emails that you need to write at what time on a Thursday, then follow up the following Monday. And by the way, CRM is not an enabler. I mean, we all lived when we had a Caddyshack on our desk and a phone. Technology is fine, but that's not an enabler. An enabler is what's in here and what's in here, and how you develop that person for their entire life. And I shudder when I hear the words training and enablement, and I'll shut up, because I'll be at it for weeks.
No, I think that's a really good rant to start on, because Tim and I and Alex all worked at the same big company, and what I saw there, because I wasn't actually in a purely sales role, and what I saw there was simultaneously the very best and the very worst of enabling people to sell things. And like all large organizations, very revenue driven and accuracy of forecast driven, and hiring, or the capability to hire the very best people, some of whom are on this call, but also for some reason catering to the lowest common denominator. So I'm not going to take a skilled salesperson and enable them to be their best selves to go out and engage customers and help customers. I'll engage the very best salespeople, and then I'll give them a pre-packaged slide deck, and you have to phone this many people, have this many meetings, have this much stuff in pipeline every single week after week after week, and that's one of the cornerstones of you being in the sales team, which just makes no sense at all, really, does it? It was Steve Jobs, I think, that said, we don't hire the best people and tell them what to do. We hire the best people so they can tell us what to do. And that's the point. If you're going to pay somebody a big salary, it's because they have something to offer. And the very least you should do is listen to what they have to say, rather than say, I'm going to hire the very best and then imprint my view of the world on them.
I agree with you, Andy, that I think the word enablement has been robbed. Because generally what enablement means is I'm going to teach you how to use the CRM so you can be an efficient person to update it. And the other thing is the Silicon Valley myth that ultimately you have to understand and know about the product, because most Silicon Valley companies are product centric. Rather than being market centric, which is understanding what the customer wants, which is the difference. What you're going to need to do is we need to train you in the product, because if you go out and have enough conversations and you tell enough, it's a bit like, where someone says, do you want to buy a watch? If you say, do you want to buy a watch to a number of people, you'll sell one. And if you knock on a number of doors, you'll sell some brushes. And that's the problem with the product centric enablement. To offer and share some, I now know it's called grey research, because Andy said it was grey research. So I used to look after a sales team of 66. Of those, seven of them always did 200%. The other 59 would do 40, 60%. So I did some grey research to find out what was it that the 7 people were doing that the other 59 people weren't doing. And one of the things that I found out about those 7 people were they all, because we work for a big company, there was a lot of training and training available. It was well known that the training budget had never been cut. It was basically an infinite amount of training that you could have. And these 7 salespeople always did a training course every quarter. The other 59 all said they didn't have time for it.
Wow.
And there was there's a number of other things which I've written about, and I talk about whenever I get asked about what the difference is between the people that were doing 200% and the people that were doing 40, 60%. But there was this quite clearly an attitude difference in terms of the way that these 7 people were making time for training. And they saw it as a I'm working for an organization. I've worked for small companies where we never got any training. Actually thinking of getting any training was ultimately it was owner owned, and you were basically taking money out of the owner's pocket to do training.
So I think that, and there's a really important nuance there. Nigel's just mentioned it, which is lack of training, lack of educational support. I don't think that you call that training. I think actually what that is self-directed learning. Yeah. And that's a really important piece. 2 gentlemen called Artis and Harris looked at this in 2007 and actually found out that salespeople, in theory, are the best learners, because they're goal-orientated, they're very highly motivated, they're task-driven. Yeah, and again, that's back to the earlier comment. We turn that off in most salespeople. But Tim, back to your point there, those 7 people went, no, this is really important for me, and you created the right culture. The difference is that those 7 had a growth mindset.
Yeah, I would say that there was you could say that the 7 had a growth and the mindset, and the other 59%, so 59 people basically had a fixed mindset. Generally, that's what you were looking at.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. Alex, you go on.
Well, I was echoing what you were saying there, Andy. The question I was going to ask Tim was, those 7, they weren't being forced to do that training. They wanted to do that training. They were trying to educate themselves. And, I remember those training courses that you were talking about, Adam, for that company we used to work for. Every year we had to do the same program and check the box. Sales enablement, equipping the sales team was different each year, but you had to do it. And those people that didn't do it got a black mark against their name. So you found yourself just going through the motions of training. And I think that's why there's this negative connotation around training. I remember several years ago now, feeling as though my team were missing a trick. It was becoming harder to grow the business. and we needed to do something different. And a friend of mine who'd left and came back to visit was telling me a story about how, you know, their business, their team used an approach called 4DX, the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And he talked about this book and how amazing it was. And I felt really inspired by his story that I bought the book, well, the audio book. I do have the actual book now, but I have to say I haven't read it. I've just listened to it. And I listened to it and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. Wildly important goals and identifying lead measures, you know, the behaviors that actually increase the probability of success. And if you define those as a team and multiple teams, you can all work together to achieve this common goal. And I think it was about 25 hours long, this audio. And I must have listened to this 20 plus times to self-teach myself. And then I implemented that within my team. But I think the point I'm really trying to get to here is, you know, how do organizations successfully, trying to use a different word than enable, increase the knowledge of their team to all work together, and inspiring en masse is really quite difficult to do. And I think that's where leadership really play a massive part.
I'm not sure it is that hard to do. It's just scary.
Right.
So if I look at John at Royal Mail, he has created a learning culture where everybody is an individual. Everybody can assess where they are, do a self-assessment, and go on their own learning journey. And the managers are pivotal in being able to develop that culture. And we've tracked that in the last year, they did something like 6,500 learning hours across 350 people. And he's got a repetitive culture going that effectively has driven, and the data goes back in and says, yes, there's disparities, Alex, between which sales managers have the right culture, because you can pull it apart. The leader can set the culture. The sales manager might go, yeah, don't worry about that. And there are languages that actually should not be used by managers because that tears away the importance. But what really interesting is you can do that. And there's actually an example that the Institute's going to bring out in a team of 12, because one of the real challenges is how do you help smaller teams, to your point about SMEs, Tim, get that learning for 240 odd, 250 odd pounds per person. It's a drop in the ocean. And what this manager's done is he's gone across his 12 people. I know which ones have done 50 hours worth of self-learning, and I've seen their performance change. And the 2 that didn't bother, they're no surprise, they're down in the area where they're probably never going to change.
Okay, so here's a question. So Tim did his grey research, got 66 salespeople in the team, 7 of them outperform, and the 7 outperformers, there's one distinct difference between them and everybody else, which is that those people take as much training as they could, and everyone else were too busy to take training. So did they outperform because of the attitudinal difference, because they wanted the training and therefore they had an open mindset? Or did they outperform because they'd done the training and they had more tools in the kit box to be able to deliver? And it's really interesting that Ty said this. We would always try to ask on the hiring process, how much does the rep self-educate and how do they implement that? So that's not about what have you learned. That's about how do you learn and how do you learn from what you learn.
So, and Tim's going to poke fun at me at this one because it's back to my personal journey. So that would be the argument in literature that you can defend correlation, but you can't necessarily defend or point to causation. And that's an interesting next step for the university and the institute to look at what is that causation. And there's a lovely lady called Lillian who looks at mental health in salespeople, and I was on a conference with her, and she introduced a really interesting curveball, which went, is the motivation fear? Because in that instance, Tim, those 7 people were the top. Did they fear not being at the top, and therefore they would embrace anything that they felt could keep them there? I'm not saying it is. That's not what I'm saying. But that's the interesting argument next, which is how do you develop causation as an argument? And then does that unlock the door for a proportion of those people, that 52 that didn't make it, that could? But it's correlation right now. Causation's an argument. But to your point, Adam, there's a lot of correlation across a lot of organizations that we've looked at where that is a absolute. The high performers have a desire to absorb knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that this whole kind of, we said about lifelong learning and stuff, if you're going through the process and you see the learning as a discrete module in a destination in its own right, when I've done this training, I will be better because I'll have done the training, rather than this is fascinating and everything that I learn during the training informs how I behave. You can see that imprinting very nicely when they go for a meeting with a prospect and they're having a conversation with the prospect, and the prospect says, well, our unique challenge is this. And they go, that's really interesting. And then they're able to feed in all of the other things that they've learned and the observations that they've made, and genuinely be learning from what the customer is saying, rather than just waiting for an opportunity to position the product in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nigel's point's very good about, often we're focused too much on the top performers. It's always a battle in leadership. We would pretty much make the number based on the performance of those 7 people. So clearly, you focus on those 7. Whereas also what we wanted to do is what can we do to take from those 7 people to replicate through those other 59?
Yeah.
Awesome. Because if there's certain behaviors that we can unlock, but as leaders, we've always been in situations where you have the high performer and the low performer, and you have to decide where you're going to place your bets and place your effort. And I'll lead leaderships and the leaders out there to decide where they're going to do that.
I think that's where there's such a big opportunity, because quite often sales managers that are tasked with unlocking, I really like that word, unlocking, unlocking something, unlocking a motivation within someone, but they're not the most skilled in their ability to coach reps to their best, because they're so focused on the number, and therefore there's a risk they kind of force it too much. Well, these 7 guys and girls are performing really well. Why aren't you? This is what they do. Why can't you do the same?
Yeah, I think there's some great comments here, and I think we need acknowledge people. Somebody's put here, brilliant, Nigel. Too many times sales managers spend their time on the top performers. Now that's a tricky one, because if you can get a movement in your top performers, the percentile of that improvement is quite significant. However, I believe that there is the bell curve, and actually there's a bunch of people who really want to do a really good job and learn and develop. They just don't know how. Back to the earlier comment of, we educate them in not learning. So I think to Nigel's point there, it's about those managers going, how can I help you? How can I find that time? You know what? Don't worry about that. Go and spend half an hour looking at this or this. And I think that's a really important point that Nigel's done. It is actually about the first line sales managers creating that next level of environment for people to develop and learn. Richard Brooks is down put here as well, which is great. It's the culture of the organization. Organizational learning culture is a massive influence. And then you stray into psychological safety, don't you? Which is Amy C. Edmondson's The Fearless Organization, another Harvard professor who looks at, if you don't create an environment where people can just at the very rudimentary basics say, I don't know, you're going to suffer.
Yeah, and I think in many cases, salespeople or employees across the board, if you admit that you don't know, then actually, you're going to get fired.
But also there's the thing about training, isn't there? I've worked in a lot of companies where training, no matter how focused and designed to help you deliver on what you're actually there to do, training was seen as an interruption. Oh, so you've got a day off, you're going off site to do some training. Oh, you're going on the training holiday, are you 2 days away or whatever? And actually, it's that attitude is phenomenally damaging, particularly to young people, because it's seen as you're not able to leave the work environment and the work pressures and decompress and get yourself into a learning space. It's almost as if, well, I'm going to be on my phone or I'm going to be on my laptop whilst you're teaching me. So you don't focus 100% on it. And even if you're not on your phone and laptop, you still got your mindset about these things that I have to do when I get back to work. So I'm going to be off for 3 days at some training. So then the day I get back, I've got 4 days worth of work to do.
Well, again, what's fascinating around that, when the degree apprenticeship was brought in, and again, John at Royal Mail looked at this, and so did Andre. There was this concern that an apprentice had to go and spend 20% of their time off the job. Yeah, and oh my God, what's the productivity of that individual? And it's been found across a number of organisations that actually they're more, and performant is a dangerous word because the organisational definition of performance differs. But actually, you find that those people spending time thinking and then reflecting, implementing, re-reflecting and being coached are going to change behaviours, and they're going to change the way that they perform. And I think it's just a viewpoint that it comes back right the way to what Tim said, which is he created a culture. He allowed people to embrace that and go away and do it. And that isn't a hard thing to do. We've just got to say as a set of individuals, okay, I'm open to change. I'm open to learn. I'm not the finished article. And that's a hard thing for an individual to do. Really hard, particularly if you are supposedly great. I've been selling for 5 years, or I've been selling for 10 years. Well, yeah, but you've probably been doing the same job 5 times. So you actually haven't advanced your knowledge on at all. And you actually haven't learned anything new. So 10 years ago, great, you could do some of the traditionals. You didn't have to worry about social media. Certainly didn't have to worry about digital disruption through COVID. You now didn't have to worry about price increases through hyperinflation and, the biggest land war in Europe in decades. And now we're looking at AI. Now that's in 5 years, in 10 years. If you don't decide as an individual to open up your thinking and actually start to go and learn that yourself and have a view on that, your own individuality, then you're going to get left behind. You're just going to be part of the bottom.
It feels like we're kind of, I know we're approaching the end. It feels like we're going to end on a bit of a conundrum, right? Which is, all of this, as what you're describing, Andy, what we're talking about requires giving salespeople more time to do their job, yet businesses don't have time. And they want more conversations, they want more pipeline, they want more revenue today.
We've had comments on a number of podcasts that we've run where salespeople have said, I don't have time for training because of the metrics that I've got in terms of the number of calls I've got to make or the number of emails I've got to send. And they've actually said, I actually don't really have time to come on here. I'm kind of doing something else. And it's amazing how those comments and how organizations aren't allowing their people to grow. I can, we've all got to make the number, but
that's a really good point. They don't decide to make the time.
Yes,
because actually you can carve out the time if it matters enough, can't you?
Yes.
And the great example for salespeople is there's always time to take a client out to lunch. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that isn't a crucial thing to do, because it is. But you can if a client shows up, you can always find time to engage with the client. And actually, this needs to take equal importance. Well, we are at the end of the session, so thank you everybody that left comments. So Jackie, Mark, Martin, Andrew, Barnaba, Ty, Nigel, Richard, and Richard. Thank you all for your fantastic comments. Thank you all for watching the show. Please do look us up and join our SalesTV group on LinkedIn that we've just started, because it'd be lovely to keep the conversation going. And hopefully we'll see you all next week. So until then, have a great week, everybody. And it's goodbye from Tim, Alex, Andy, and myself. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Lovely